Roadside restaurant. I needed a rest. The way home was still long, and I had taken an even longer route to avoid the traffic jam at the nearby border post. It was early morning, and I had driven the whole night through, passing slumbering cities and vast landscapes drenched in darkness on both sides of the highway. I opened the window of my car to let the fresh morning air in and feel the warmth of the rising sun on my skin. The faint scent of pines and salt and home. I had never seen the restaurant before, although I was sure I had taken this route at least once years ago. It lay at the side of a patch of road leading down into a valley, making a sharp turn like a river flowing down the steep hill. Behind the restaurant, the woods were still shrouded in darkness, as if the night held tightly onto the trunks and hid from the sun that was about to ride up into the sky. I made an abrupt stop when I saw that the restaurant was already open at this time. It looked nice from the outside, the walls white and each corner engulfed in slate tiles. I left my car after I had parked it in front of this building that seemed so out of place in its rustic majesty in this desolate and woody hinterland. Peeking through the window, I saw that way more customers sat inside than I had expected so early in the morning. I stepped inside and took a seat. A waitress approached me in an instant and took my coffee order. As I was waiting, I saw that none of the other people in there were talking to each other, just staring blankly at the walls or the tables in front of them. They all looked exhausted and shabby. And then, the stench hit me. It smelled of rotten flesh and sheep carcasses. A scent I was too familiar with from the church festivities I witnessed as a child every summer when the scraps of slaughter were left outside to rot in the boiling August sun. Weeks after the priests and the locals and the guests from outside were gone and had returned to their lives, anticipating the next big gathering, the chicken and stray dogs would pick through the decomposing organs and furs, having a feast on their own for a while after we had finished ours. My coffee was not much more than dark brown water, too hot and tasteless. Before I could ask for the bathroom, the waitress looked at me from her eyes lying in deep caves in her face, her mouth adorned with rotten teeth. She looked sickly. "You should eat something. You are tired and you will be here for a while. We have the best meats." I felt goosebumps on my neck. I looked outside and my car was gone from the spot I had left it. Had I fallen asleep while driving? The world behind the restaurant windows had become a thick fog, only distant lights of green and yellow dots shimmering through the wall of white. Was all of this an imagination of my tired mind, a weird half-dream? None of it, the waitress said, now smiling in a wide grin, her thin lips almost stretching from one ear to the other, as if she could read my mind. But this is her hunting ground. The goat of the hinterland rules here. She feeds on the travelers. She's the spider of the streets, and you stepped into her net. This is her slaughterhouse. You will feed her, in time. Your bones and nails, your skin and flesh. Tasty. Behind the counter, a huge creature stepped through the door, naked, dirty, and tainted with dried blood and mud, bearing the marks of both woman and beast, with the way too big head of a goat on her shoulders, wielding two rusty cleavers and looking at the crowd from her animal eyes. The waitress turned her head to the goat and gasped. She is a goddess. Soon, you will feel nothing but joy and praise to become part of her. Give up all hopes of escaping. There is nothing outside. She will pick one now, she said with an admiring look on her face as the goat walked to the front from behind the counter, her hooves clattering on the tile floor, the cleavers in her hands rubbing their blades against each other. The other people stared on blankly, as if used to this view, awaiting her decision and their fate in cold apathy. She picked one. As the goat stood with her back turned to me, I saw countless arms and faces and toes and teeth had grown out of her back, some already decomposing, the free spots of skin overgrown either by the sturdy short fur of a goat or showing human skin. "You see that?" the waitress asked me, her eyes still fixating on the beast in front of us. "Soon, you will be one of those. Maybe I will recognize your face when it grows out of her back. You will truly become part of something great, something immortal, godly." I watched in overwhelming shock, still thinking all of this was a dream, a nightmare. "Now, what would you like to eat?" "She likes her stock well-fed and fat," the waitress said and handed me a menu, old and full of stains, the paper already yellowed. On the front and in barely readable, bleached-out letters, "Welcome. Your sacrifice will please a god. Rejoice." The Resurrection Restaurant. I had finished billing the final group of guests and stood leaning against the wall. The new waiter was sweeping up some dirt in the far corner, and one of the more senior waiters cleared the table from a large and rather messy party. I felt exhausted after all the work I had done that day. The most tiring part is explaining over and over again about the restaurant's name and logo. The establishment's name was the Resurrection Restaurant, and the logo was dotted with foreign symbols from no human language that has ever been spoken. I would always say the building used to be owned by an insane necromancer who had numerous secret passageways and hidden rooms that I now used as storage. While it is true there are numerous secret passages in that building, the name and symbols had nothing to do with an insane necromancer. They were a signal. To any other anomalies like me, they need a safe place to stay between whatever jobs they do to keep afloat and hidden. Ding ding, the door opened and a tall, thin man strode through the door, his face covered with a black cap and turquoise scarf. "Hey! You're not meant to my junior waiter began. "Don't worry," I interrupted. "He's one of my VIP guests." I turned to the mysterious man. "Ah, good evening, Mr. Barnum. I have been expecting you. I'm guessing you might like the specialty VIP drinks," I said, gesturing towards the manager-only door to my far left. "Indeed," he said, his dull, bleary eyes swiveling around in an attempt to focus on me. We strolled over to the door, withdrew a small, oddly shaped key from my suit pocket, and turned it in the lock. It clicked and the door cracked open slightly. I widened the gap and gestured for Mr. Barnum to enter. He shuffled inside, and I soon followed, shutting the door behind me. As I locked the heavy door to my office, Mr. Barnum peered around before spotting a heavy wood trap door embedded in the ground. He stooped down and heaved the heavy door open before climbing down the sturdy metal ladder within. I followed suit and accompanied him to booth 3. I opened the door for him, and he stepped inside and sank into the embrace of the shadows, unraveling his scarf and removing his cap. All that was visible of him was 2 glowing white eyes, though I could have sworn there was a red tint to them. "Can I have my usual?" He croaked. "Indeed, sir. I will be right back with your selection," I replied with a smile on my face. Shutting the door first, I strolled over to the trap door that led to the drink storage and walk-in freezer. I lifted it and jumped down the small drop. My eyes scanned each bottle cap, searching for the right code. X782. Perfect. I grabbed the bottle and moved to the freezer. I heaved the armored door open and stepped inside. The cold felt amazing on my scales, which had been trapped beneath my skin suit, and I considered taking it off. But no. I needed to keep up appearances. I selected a rather fatty cut of beef and removed it from the hook. Happy with my selection, I made my way back to Mr. Barnum. I knocked on the door, opened it a little, and slipped the food inside. Thank you, he croaked. It's no problem, sir. I love to do this and make people happy. I replied. May you sit with me? Yes, I answered, quite dumbfounded. He never let anyone sit with him while he ate. I slipped inside and sat opposite him. The darkness obscured all his features but his bleary white eyes. I heard him chug the drink I got him and he breathed heavily. His eyes flickered from white to orange to red. No. You. Have it? I spluttered. Yes. It's too late for me though. The disease has begun to take over my bodily functions, he twitched. I think it's time you saw my face. And I think it's time I see yours, he said, reaching for the light switch. He flicked it on and the pure sight of him shocked me. His skin was black like coal and his unnatural red eyes burned a horrid scarlet color and his pale tongue hung limp from his mouth. I reached behind my collar and removed my mask. My snout unfurled and my yellow eyes shone. He seemed pleased with this. You know, if the disease takes me, it will spread to you, he said, reaching into his pocket. I shivered. He withdrew a knife from his pocket and brought it to his throat. Goodbye, my friend. He stabbed himself and promptly died. Well, at least he didn't spread the disease. Restaurant kitchen encounter. At one point a few years back, I ended up working in a small, privately owned restaurant. It was set on a small main drag in a tiny, historic community. The restaurant stood out amongst the locals and tourists due to its multicultural food variety. The restaurant served everything from American cuisine to Indian, Thai, French, and Middle Eastern foods. The small restaurant was formerly a popular, privately owned Chinese restaurant and a local favorite. Unfortunately, the older man who owned and operated it passed away inside the restaurant one day, so suffice it to say that the local town folk didn't take too kindly to the foreign city woman who bustled in shortly after his death and purchased his restaurant. Not only was my former boss flaky and irresponsible, but she could also come off as quite curt and rude at times. So, she had a rough go at first obtaining the proper permits and whatnot in order to renovate the historic building. The thing is that when you do certain renovations in an old building like that, the local laws require you to then update a lot of other things that could be quite costly. So that meant that she decided to just use the staff that she'd hired, which was us, to help her with most of the renovation work. Everything was going pretty smooth, you know, nothing out of the ordinary. That is until one overcast, drizzly day when we were all gathered in the dining area for a staff meeting. As we all sat there quietly, listening to the boss lady, something a little strange happened. The front entrance door to the restaurant suddenly opened about halfway and then carefully closed after a second, as though someone had simply stepped in. Of course, there was no one there as the door was almost entirely glass and we would have seen a person on the other side. We all looked at one another confused, but we just chopped it up to be the breeze since the back door was open, though there was a set of closed kitchen doors in between. The second odd thing to happened to another employee when she was there alone one night. According to her, Just after she turned a corner passing a shelf with some tools on it, an empty cordless drill case went flying past her head. It barely missed her and smashed into the wall in front of her. She seemed pretty put off when she told us about it in the kitchen the next day. Following that, random small things would happen here and there. Like, our boss would ask us once in a while why one of us didn't come into her office when she'd see one of us walk by her open door, but we were usually puzzled by that, as none of us had ever even walked past her office during that time. Besides that, we'd get the occasional strange sound, like a faint voice or a door opening or closing. Also, when I'd be in the kitchen putting together some ingredients for a recipe, I'd have to walk away for a second to go grab another ingredient off the back shelf or something. But when I'd return less than 15 seconds later, one of the ingredients I'd set out before leaving the area would be gone. I'd end up having to measure out and prepare the same ingredient again, annoyed. But I had no idea that it was about to get a lot more terrifying for me. The final thing to happen to me and my other coworkers was the worst experience I ever had that was paranormal hands down. But, to properly explain this part to you, I'm going to need to explain a couple of things about restaurant kitchens to you. In a typical restaurant kitchen setup, you have a cook line, and the cook line is a line in a skinny walking or standing space typically between the oven, fryers, and cooktop, with the prep surfaces and small fridges on the opposite side, leaving about a 3 to 4 foot walking aisle forming a cook line. Besides that, there's a dishwasher outside of that line, followed by the rest of what you'd expect to find in a restaurant kitchen. You know, like fridges and freezers all on a large scale. You also have your giant hood fans above the cooking area and a water heater. The reason why I point all those out is because together, they all constantly make noise. Think like louder ambient background noise constantly. So this one day, there are 3 of us working in the kitchen. Me, my boss, and another employee on the dishwasher. My boss and I were on the cook line, while the dishwasher was a few feet away from the cook line. We were all 3 working as normal, when all of a sudden, it got quiet. Think of when you don't realize you've been hearing a constant low sound until it suddenly stops, and then you notice the sudden change in the noise environment. Except for, it got dead silent. Almost like an invisible soundproof blanket got thrown over the 3 of us. As soon as I noticed it, I looked around at the other 2, and they also looked puzzled. What the hell? I questioned out loud. Why is it so freaking quiet all of a sudden? Asked the dishwasher guy, suspiciously. I don't know, my boss replied, drawing out her words nervously. She turned to face me, as I was standing directly behind her on the narrow cook line. Nora, go make sure that the fridges and hood fans are still running. Maybe the power is out. So I ventured the 10 or so feet outside the cook line area, and weirdly enough, I could hear the hood fans and even the dishwasher, water heater, and all the fridges and freezers running like normal. I went back to my boss and, with a confused look, told her everything's working fine. That was the first creepy part of that, but when I stepped back onto the cook line to tell my boss, all was silent again. Well, Nora, get back to work grilling those peppers, she snapped. So I got back onto the cook line beside her. After a couple of minutes though, I suddenly started to get tunnel vision and I felt dizzy and nauseous. I told my boss, and she told me to go sit out back for a few minutes and get some fresh air, which I promptly did. As I was sitting outside trying to feel better, I could see my boss go into her office, which was kitty corner from the back door. Since the back door was open with just the screen door closed, I was able to hear her while she made a phone call. She sounded urgent and shaky as she asked the person on the other end of the line to please bring in an abalone shell, some sage, and some kind of weird oil. Now, The reason she needed those particular items was because, according to her, she had felt something walk through her on the cook line that wasn't good. The shitty part is that I was standing right behind her, inches away on that cook line. I waited for her to finish her phone call and return to the cook line before I went back in. By the time I got back in, everything sounded normal again on the cook line. When I got off my shift about an hour later, believe me when I say that I made the normally 45-minute drive home in just under 30 minutes. All night that night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. But the few times I managed to slip into sleep, I kid you not, I got jolted right back awake because I would see a screaming demon-like thing right in my face. The strange man at a restaurant today. A very bizarre situation happened to me today, and I wrote it on my website, but I'm just gonna copy and paste it here. Let me know what you guys think. It was just another day for me. I went to the same Tim Hortons that I always go to. I ordered my food and sat down at the restaurant table. All of a sudden, I noticed this guy walk into the restaurant and head for the counter. I only started listening when he asked the cashier if they had found a purse that his mom lost yesterday. Nothing out of the ordinary at that point. Things like that happen. It was what happened next that made me feel uneasy. The cashier told him to come back tomorrow because the manager would be in and they would be able to help him further. Which makes sense. You can't pick up somebody else's wallet or cards. That person has to come themselves. That's just common sense. Otherwise, it seems sketchy. For as long as I've worked retail, that has been the rule in any place. This is where things started to change. The guy suddenly becomes angry and raises his voice. He said that he was in a hurry and that his mom came in yesterday but had cancer, which is why he had to come in for her. He said that her cancer pills were in that purse and it was important. Well, hold on a second. Something isn't adding up here. Let's pick apart the pieces of information that he gave us. His mom lost her purse yesterday at the restaurant, right? Why did they not go back to the restaurant later that night? The restaurant at that specific location had 24/7 service. Even if they were closed, why not call the night employees who work during closing hours? Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they perhaps didn't realize they had lost the purse until the next day. Are you saying that his mom had enough energy to go out the night before, but less than 24 hours later was so sick in bed that she couldn't even get up? That seems a little odd to me. There's also the fact that he kept saying he was in a hurry, but he also said he would wait as long as it took until they gave him what he wanted. How much in a hurry could he have been in? He told them he also wanted to watch the video footage himself so he could see for himself if his mom left with the purse or not. Seems a bit unusual for someone to request video footage of whether or not their mom lost an item. Is he trying to accuse someone at the restaurant of stealing? Is he implying the restaurant is trying to hide something? Why not just ask them if they found a purse, give contact info where they can reach you, and leave it at that? Why go the extra mile to make them show you video surveillance? So, is this just a regular man who was mad about his mom losing her purse and simply lost his temper? Was it a man who was just trying to be a jerk? Or was it something more sinister? Was this a man trying to find and track down a woman and her items to do God knows what? Unfortunately, we might never know. The man ended up leaving after the cashier finally convinced him there was nothing she could do. He stayed with her for about 20 minutes, yelling and watching her work. He eventually left and said he'd be back tomorrow. I can only hope it was actually his mom and just lost his temper due to having a bad day. I am a dishwasher at a high-end restaurant, and what I found in the sink will always haunt me. I first got the job at Carparelli's just over a year ago and have been working there ever since. Carparelli's is one of the most exclusive and high-end restaurants in the city, and sometimes people will wait for a few months just to have the pleasure of eating there. I work as the dishwasher there, and so I am usually kept quite busy. Most nights, the restaurant will serve around 100 people, so my job is to wash the dishes, dry the dishes, and then put away the dishes. I don't ever really get to see what goes on inside the restaurant because I am often stuck out the back, so I only have a rough idea of the type of customers that we serve. There is a small window in the kitchen that allows you to see out into the dining area, which I can look out of whenever I am putting away the plates. From what I have seen, nearly everyone wears either a tuxedo or a nice dress. I have even seen some men wearing a top hat, and I have noticed that quite a few of the patrons will also be wearing some kind of fancy gloves. That is the type of customer we usually get at Carparelli's. Rich and fancy. I don't mind my job too much. It can be quite physically demanding, but it pays well, and it pays quite well in fact. I get regular shifts and work long hours, so when my paycheck arrives at the end of the week, all my hard work seems worth it. I have made friends with a couple of the chefs, but the one person that I can't quite seem to get along with is the head chef. No one knows his name, everyone just calls him Chef. Chef isn't too bad to work for. When I first started, I expected him to act like Gordon Ramsay, so I was pleasantly surprised when I found out that he is a lot more relaxed and easygoing when he is in the kitchen. Sure, the kitchen can get a bit heated, but like the old saying goes, if you can't handle the heat, then get out of the kitchen, and I think that I can handle the heat. The main attraction at Carparelli's is the head chef's special meal. It is an exclusive meal that has to be specifically ordered, and it is only allowed to be cooked by the chef and only the chef. No one else is allowed to know what this meal is, and it is such a closely guarded secret that chef will go into another room to cook it. When he is cooking the exclusive meal, he will always keep the door closed so that no one can look in and see any of the secret ingredients and how the meal is cooked. So, last night, my shift began like any other. I get to work and start by cleaning any dishes that may have built up throughout the day, mainly dishes created by the chefs preparing for that night's service. I clean those until 6 o'clock. That is when service begins. It is usually about half an hour after that I begin cleaning the customers' plates and cutlery, so it was around 6:30 that the plates began to be bought and to be washed. So, there I was, happily washing the plates in the sink, then loading them into a large tray that would then be put inside the dishwasher. I picked up a large stack of plates that were waiting to be washed and placed them into the sink. While I was carrying the plates to the sink, I could feel that something was left on one of the plates, probably just a little bit of food. It is supposed to be the waiter's job to properly clear the plate of any food before I wash them, but tonight, there was a fairly new waiter working, so I excused the missed food on the plate and got to washing them. I had placed the large stack of plates into the full sink, submerging them into the water. I began by washing the top plate and then placing it onto the tray that goes into the dishwasher. I repeated this with the next few plates, but then I felt something floating in the water. It must be the food that was left on the plate, I thought. I tried to ignore it, but would sometimes feel this small clump of food brush against my hand as I was washing the plates. Then, it brushed up against my hand one more time, but this time, I noticed that it felt a bit strange. It was quite hard and fairly long. It didn't feel like it was a bit of food. I decided to grab whatever it was, preparing to throw it straight into the bin. I reached down into the sink and found the mysterious floating object. I placed my fingers around whatever it was and I felt kind of strange. It was quite long, it felt hard, but the outside was quite soft, and what is that at the end of it? Is that a nail? I quickly pulled this strange object out of the water and looked at what it was. My thought was correct, it was a nail. A fingernail actually, and it was still attached to the rest of the finger. The long, index finger had a large cut at one end of it, where it had been cut off from the rest of the hand. There was still a bit of blood coming out the end of it, but it was also because it had been submerged, it was beginning to wrinkle. As soon as I saw what it was, I let out a scream and dropped the finger back into the sink. My scream must have been quite loud because, within a few seconds, the head chef was standing behind me, wanting to know what I was screaming about. "What the hell are you screaming about?" I heard the chef's voice say from behind me. "There is something in the sink." "It's a finger." "It's someone's finger," I replied. Even I could hear the fear and disgust in my voice, and Chef must have heard it too, because he quickly tried to reassure me that it couldn't have been a finger that I had seen. Asterisk, there is no way that it is a human finger in the sink. Asterisk, he said, trying his best to sound comforting. "Here, let me look at it for you." Before I could say anything, Chef plunged his hand into the sink, felt around for a second, and then pulled his hand back out. He had the finger grasped in his hand. I saw him take a look at it and his face changed. He realized that I was correct. There was most definitely a human finger in the sink. He looked at me for a moment and then he just said one sentence before he walked away, still holding onto the finger. "Oh," he said, quite casually, "that's not supposed to be in there." As he walked away, all I could think was, no, it's not. It's still supposed to be attached to a human hand. I was a bit taken aback by how casually Chef had just picked up the finger, and I wasn't quite sure what he meant by "it's not supposed to be in there." Where was it supposed to be then? Was he expecting it to be somewhere else? I saw the head chef carrying the finger through the kitchen, but it looked like he was trying to hide it from other workers as he walked through. I watched him until he disappeared around a corner, and I knew that he was heading to the room where he usually prepares his secret meal. He reappeared only a moment later, and he seemed to just get back to work, unfazed by the fact that a human finger had been found in the sink. I didn't know what to do. This seemed like it was a police matter, but Chef was just acting like it hadn't happened, or that this was normal. I knew that the finger had been bought in on one of the dirty plates, and so I guessed that the finger probably belonged to a customer. So, why wasn't Chef reacting with horror or fear? I think Chef saw me staring at him because he looked over in my direction and then began to walk towards me. As he approached me, I managed to ask him, "Asterisk, is the person who lost the finger all right? Shouldn't we call the police? Or an ambulance? Or anybody?" Asterisk, the chef then just calmly replied, "Don't worry, it is being taken care of. The customer is okay and the matter is being dealt with. But, if wish, you can go and sit down for a while. I can understand that it might be a bit traumatic to find out what you did. So, take a bit of time off to recover." I was beginning to feel quite sick, so I took him up on his offer and I went to sit down in the small, staff lounge area. It was good to sit down, but something was still not right. Why was everyone so calm about this situation? Why were the police not here? Surely, I should be getting questioned about what I had found. But I wasn't. Instead, all that was happening to me was that I got to sit down for a bit, but it seemed like Chef still expected me to work after this. This was not right, so I decided to go and see the head chef and tell him that I was going to go home. There was no way I could finish my shift, and I just needed to get out of the restaurant. I got up off of one of the staff lounges and began to walk back down the kitchen. I was just about to enter the kitchen when I heard some voices. They were coming from inside the room that the chef uses to prepare his secret meal. The voices were muffled, but when I got close to the closed door, I could make out what they were saying. Please, it was a mistake. I didn't mean to leave it sitting on the plate. I'm not sure how it happened, but I promise it will not happen again, one voice was saying. It was hard to make out who the voice belonged to, but I was pretty sure it was the voice of the waiter. The one who was still fairly new. No, you're right, it won't happen again, another voice said. It didn't take long to figure out that this voice was Chef's. He continued speaking. Asterisk, but that doesn't solve the dilemma we are facing. Someone is paid for the chef's special, and you know the rules. One man's payment becomes another man's meal. I needed that finger for the customer that ordered my special. Do you think I can serve that after it has been sitting in a sink? Asterisk, no, I know you can't serve it now, the waiter replied. I could sense the fear in his voice. He knew he had made a huge mistake, and he was very fearful of what that mistake would cost him. No, I can't. But the customer has already paid, and we can't make him pay again. So, I will have to get the ingredient from another source, I heard Chef say, a hint of anger in his voice. No. Please. I will find you another. Please, anything but this, the waiter yelled out. It sounded like he was begging. He was desperate. I then heard a scream come from the other side of the door. It was a scream of pure pain. The sound was muffled by the door, but because I was standing with my ear to the door, I heard it quite clearly. I then felt the fear rise throughout my body. My heart rate got faster and I felt the urge to run away. I hadn't quite processed what had happened on the other side of the door, but I knew that I wasn't supposed to hear what I just had. I felt my legs suddenly moving, and before I knew it, I was running through the kitchen. My flight response had kicked in. I kept on running through the kitchen and out one of the side doors that led outside. Before I got out of the kitchen, though, I ran past the small window that looked out into the dining area. The first thing I noticed when I glanced out the window was a fairly large group of people sitting at a table, all dressed in suits. What was strange about this group of people, though, was that all of them were missing most of their fingers on one of their hands. I've been getting weird texts ever since I went to that restaurant. So I have been getting weird texts ever since I went to this certain restaurant. I won't leave in the name of being respectful to the business. I'll tell you how the night went. I walked into this little restaurant. I live in a very rural part of my area. It's a small town. Very homey, nothing bad ever happens. Last summer there was a murder that completely shook up the town, but that has nothing to do with this. So I walked in and we were greeted and sat. Nothing felt off, and honestly, I was just excited to get to spend time with my wonderful family who I often don't see because of usual teenage things such as parties and late nights. I noticed a man just staring at me. So I looked at him and smiled, as everyone in my small town does. He just kind of looked afraid and looked away. I laughed it off thinking he was nervous. I may have said man, but he was probably a year or two older than me with dark brown hair and bright blue eyes. He is pretty attractive, but I didn't recognize him going to our school. Being on the cheer team and pretty well known around the school, I knew everyone. So we left, and nothing weird happened at all. The next night, I went to dinner with a couple of friends. It was a 40-minute wait, so I already wasn't happy. We got to our table and ordered. At this restaurant, you get little rolls, and while we were talking and eating, my friend tapped me and whispered in my ear that she saw a guy at a table on the other side of this little barrier staring at me this whole time. I thought this was super weird, but I mean, what are you gonna do? I just thought it was some random creepy dude, or maybe he wasn't even staring at me. Maybe he zoned out. But she pointed to him and my stomach dropped. It was the same man from last night. He half smiled at me. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I mean, coincidences happen all the time, right? After this, I started seeing him all the time in school. He would stare at me up and down and stand at the fence to watch me cheer. Now on to the weird messages. I get these messages saying wanna fuck and a million other things, writer going into full detail, and when I ask they don't respond. I honestly don't know what to do. It's creeping me out. Please leave suggestions on what I should do in the comments. My supernatural experiences in a haunted restaurant. I live in a town in the UK which has quite a history of battles and civil war. When I was 19, I got a job as a waitress in a popular restaurant in the town center, which was a very, very old building. Charles II had stayed there and had escaped out of the back door, as the legend goes. The owner told me that the place was haunted, but I thought, aren't they all? The building still had, within it, an actual dungeon that had been used so many years before and a fake skeleton within it. I wasn't too keen on the dungeon, but it was a taking point for customers. So, the first time I worked here, I was in summer holidays from university. One day, I was restocking the mini bar upstairs with a variety of mixers and clean glasses when I knocked one of the bottles over. I heard a series of sounds, like several bottles all rolling underneath the bar and smashing one by one. Finally, a wine glass appeared out of nowhere and smashed into the crate that I had put bottles into. I thought I was going to have a lot of cleaning up to do. But when I looked under the bar, there was absolutely nothing there. I was very confused. The only bottle on its side was the one I originally knocked over. And it wasn't broken. Another time, I was walking through the kitchen, holding a stack of plates, and my necklace flew off and landed at the other end of the kitchen. When I picked it up, it was still done. Pictures floated off the wall sometimes whilst we all watched. Ladles jumped out of pots that the chefs were cooking with. Glasses moved across surfaces before my eyes. Some of the staff saw a Civil War soldier walking through the upstairs bar, but I never did. Lots of things like this happened, but when I went back there to work at Christmas, nothing did. Whatever it was, I never felt scared, so I guess it was not malevolent, whatever it was. But I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I work in a haunted pub. Alright, so I've been sitting on this for a year or so, but the longer I wait the more shit happens, so I kinda just wanna dump everything out and you guys can bully me for being a pussy and or give advice. So I'm an apprentice chef. I started about a year and a half ago and the job itself is a dream come true. My coworkers quickly became like family. And the pub is the only good restaurant and bar in town, so I already knew most of the people there just from hanging around there. Small town, you know how it is. The pub itself was one of the first buildings in town. I think the oldest parts are roughly 140 to 150 years old. So about 6 months into my apprenticeship, I started having really weird experiences. It started one day when the head chef was outside talking to a delivery driver. I was packing away bags of pasta in the dry store when I heard someone coming through the staff-only door that is connected to the gaming room/pokies room. I quickly check it out cause it was relatively early in the morning, like 9-ish, which for whatever reason is prime time for the local crackheads to lose money on the slot machines and have a meltdown and accidentally walk into the kitchen. So I walk into the main kitchen room and lo and behold, nothing. The door is closed and still. Fuck it, I'm tired as shit, probably imagined it. Go back to packing away pasta. The door opens again and I walk out. No one there. Again, whatever. Rinse and relearn 1 or 2 more times and I heard my head chef walking in from the outside door. I knew it was the outside door cause it makes this noticeable squeak that drives me fucking mental. I asked him about something to do with the order, and as he replied to me, I saw him unlock the other door. The one I heard open and close 3 or 4 times. Keeping in mind there are only 2 doors to exit the kitchen, and each has very distinct noises you associate with them. They sound nothing like the cool room or bathroom doors. Fast forward a week or 2 and I get in half an hour early to make pizza bases. I was standing in the middle of the room on a bench rolling out the dough when I got this weird, cliché, icy feeling on the right side of my neck. I spun around to see what was causing it and for the briefest of moments saw a black shadowy figure peeking around the corner to the dry store maybe 2 meters behind me. All night long, every time I could glance over towards the dry store doorway, I would either see this apparition again briefly or shudder. This still happens from time to time, but it is different now because it is just kind of like white noise. But that initial night was freaky. A few honorable mentions are my turning knife disappearing the only time I've ever needed it, only to appear in my knife bag about 5 minutes after getting yelled at for losing it drinking a beer in the bar after my shift, and while mid-conversation everything just went completely silent for about 5 to 10 seconds, multiple times yelling service, and hearing a reply only to realize no waitresses are in the kitchen smelling cigarettes in the cool room. The event that made me decide maybe this story was worth telling happened last night. So over the past month, one of the bars in the building got completely redone. It was all pink and floral compared to the beige and dark beige it had previously. For anonymity's sake, I don't want to give away what they named the bar, but it's named after the guy who built the original pub. So last night I and my mates were testing out this new bar, and a few drinks and we started talking about the guy who built the pub. I'm really into local history, so I was going decently in depth about everything when all of a sudden there's this massive thud. It came from nowhere, but everyone in the room heard it. While everyone was silent and looking around, one of my mates pipes up, "It's probably the ghost of insert guy who built the pub name here coming to have a pint in his new bar," and as much as it pains me to say, it got a decent laugh. Until the second thud. This time no one said anything, and in the silence, I swear to God, Allah, Muhammad, whatever deity you want me to swear to, I am not making this up in the silence. I heard a whisper in my ear, "Group of queers," like what even the fuck, what am I meant to do with that sentence anyway? That's all I've got off the top of my head. Feel free to ask questions, or if you need anything clarified. Murder Burger. I was getting off of work. I was driving in my car, heading home. I live in the city. The lights are beautiful there. My job required me to stay up very late into the night. I would sometimes get off around midnight. This was one of those nights. I happened to be very hungry, which was unfortunate because nearly every restaurant I drove past was closed for the night, which wasn't unusual for the city I lived in. The only place I saw that was open was some type of diner. The red and white exterior looked fairly new. The name of the place was Genie's. I'd never seen it around before, so I figured it must have just been put into operation. I got out of my car and went inside. The interior was the same colors as the exterior, red and white. Behind the counter, I could see where the kitchen was. Upon looking around, I could see there were no other customers there besides me. So I walked up to the counter and ordered my food, just a soda and a burger. I sat at one of the tables as I waited for my food. I got the feeling that I was being watched. Out of paranoia, I looked around. It was then that I saw that the waiter was just staring at me. He had a menacing look on his face, one that gave me the creeps. After a few minutes, the same waiter brought me my food. "Enjoy," he said creepily. I quickly unwrapped the burger as I was starving. I took a bite of the burger. It was juicier than others I've had before. After taking a second bite, I felt something peculiar in my mouth. I pulled out the foreign object to see that it was a human tooth. I don't know how my tooth got in the burger, and it certainly wasn't my tooth, so whose tooth was it? I looked up to see both the cook and waiter giving me a menacing glare. This made my mind grow in suspicion as to what exactly was in this burger. I immediately got up, got the burger and the soda, and left without paying. The cook and waiter ran after me, but I was able to get into my car before they could catch me. I drove quickly to the nearest police station. I couldn't shake the thought of how the cook and waiter stared at me. When I turned the burger and tooth into the police and told them the whole story, they were suspicious, but said they'd get the food and tooth tested anyway. After a few days, I received a call from the police. They said that the drink had sedatives in it and that the meat and tooth had both come from a human. I kept up with the investigation into the restaurant via the news. Police had discovered various bones, organs, and pounds of meat that were found to be from humans. They also found a list of names. A lot of the names were crossed off except for one at the bottom, which was my name. The other names listed were those of people who'd been reported missing from all across the country. The cook and waiter were arrested and sentenced to life in prison for multiple homicides as well as attempted murder. I don't know why my name was on that list. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened had I not listened to my instinct and escaped that place. For all I know, I could have been the next victim's last meal.